And I will welcome everybody to class number 99 of Faith and Calm. And tonight, as promised, we're going to examine a little bit about Esther, really the heroine, and the whole Megillah is named after her. Actually, my wife had a question: what does Megillah mean? So I looked it up this week, and it means scroll. I thought it meant. She thought it meant revelation, but no, it's from Galal, I guess, from roll. So you have to roll the scroll. So it's the whole Megillah. Now, why is it named after Esther? Because she really is the star of the story and teaches us a lot. The Gemara asks an interesting question. They said everybody's name here also, everything that happens in history has to be hinted somewhere in the 5 books of Moses. So they ask the question, where do you find Esther in the Chumash? And the answer is in the Parsha Devarim, which says, God says that there will come a day where I will conceal myself. Aster et panai. I will conceal my face, which sounds like a negative thing, because when God's not apparent and he's not part of our lives, it's scary because it's a very disorienting situation. So why is that related to the Megillah? Well, superficially, it's because God's name's not even mentioned in the Megillah because he doesn't seem to be present in it. But actually, behind the scenes, he is present everywhere. And that's going to be the theme tonight. This is concealment. This world we live in now is not the time of the temple, where you could just go to Jerusalem and see what the reality is and be connected to everything, but rather how to survive in contemporary society where there's a lot of concealment and a lot of hidden-ness and a lot of darkness, and things don't seem to go the right way. So Esther is very much about piercing through the veils of darkness, seeing beyond the veils of perception, as in the words of Oscar Wilde, break through the veils of perception to see the deeper reality, because it's all there, you just don't see it. So let me start with a quiz about life. This is actually based on a talk by Simon Jacobson, and I liked it very much, so I absconded with his talk. He asked the question. He asked the question of the audience, and the question is, if you went through the course of your day, starting from when you get up in the morning and go through all the events of your day, can you connect all the dots, all the events to one particular theme to see how it's all connected? And the answer usually for most of us, myself included, is it doesn't seem like what I started in the morning thinking what the plan was going to be. It ended up that way. It went south this way, it went that way. I had a good plan and I understood how things were going to go. And then the events overtook and this one happened and this happened and somebody else threw me a curveball. And I ended up at the end of the day sort of all confused and what was the point of all of this? What did I go through all day? What was I trying to get to? Now, we may say, well, that's life. Yeah, that's life. That's the problem. I mean, welcome to the club. I mean, that's what happens to most of us in the course of the day. But I'm going to posit that it's going to be that's really part of our difficulty, is that when our lives are all fragmented into small pieces and we can't really do the things that we need to do and the important things in life, and we're always driven by the smaller things, that has a psychological and a spiritual effect on us. And it's like, we need to go to a cleansing to try and have weekends or something, where we reconnect, where we rebond, we get refocused on where we're supposed to be, because it's this kind of a life doesn't really go anywhere. And in parallel, that's also the story of the Megillah. It also seems like a bunch of disconnected dots that don't really connect together. There's a king and he has a party and he has a queen and he wants her to dance and she doesn't want to be a sex object, so she refuses, and therefore he has her hung, and then he has to have a beauty contest, and then he has, And then he finds Esther in the beauty contest, and he makes her his queen. And then Mordecai comes into the situation, and Haman becomes a big shot. And then there's a decree against the Jews. And this all took over 12 years. So if you were in the middle of this, you would have not seen how this is all connected, just as much as you wouldn't have seen how, what Ukraine has to do with Belarus, which with Italy, and with, it's just current events. At the end, you see how it all connects together. At the end, as Kierkegaard said, you can't necessarily know the movie from the beginning. You see it at the end of the program, at the end of this thing, you see how it all fits together. That's what you see at the end. At the end of that story, you see how everything actually fit together. There had to be the party. Esther had to be the queen. There had to be an Achashverosh. There had to be a Haman. Otherwise, it wouldn't have all come together. But that's at the end. Usually, sometimes we don't even get to see at the end of our lives, and certainly not at the end of the day, how this all fit together. Again, I'm telling you that this is a problem. When things go like this, it's very confusing, and you don't necessarily understand because you're driven by external factors. And therefore, you can see the external factors as the reality. So let me give you a little story to illustrate this. It comes from the Baal Shem Tov. I like the story. I don't think I've told the story before. It's a classic story. The story goes as follows. There once was a man in the time of the Baal Shem Tov, an opponent of this new Hasidic movement, and his wife, and they had a child, and it was a daughter, and she grew up, and she had some disease or something happened to her, and she became paralyzed. And it was, of course, a tragedy in the family. They went all to the doctors and rabbis and everything. Nobody had any solutions. And finally, the wife keeps pestering, hey, I heard that there's a miracle worker in the neighborhood. He's named the Baal Shem Tov. Why don't you go to him? Because I don't have anything to do with these Hasidim and miracle workers. It's all Mishigash and so forth. It's doctors and rabbis, and they don't have any answers. But, it's his daughter, so he has to do something. His wife is pestering him. So he puts her on a wagon. In the back of the wagon, he drives off. He goes to the Baal Shem Tov, forced against his will. He gets to the Baal Shem Tov. He sees this little hut where the house where the Baal Shem Tov is, and the cups. He goes in and he sees, are you the Baal Shem Tov? He says, yeah. So the guy says, here. He takes a big sack of money. He says, here's the money. Heal my daughter. The Baal Shem Tov looks at him, and he knows this. He understands the story with the guy. He says, listen, I don't do this for the money. Take your money, and your daughter should be well. And he takes the money, and he grabs the Baal Shem Tov and takes it, and he throws it out the window. I don't need your money. The money flies out the window, the bag, and lands in the street, and it rips open, and the coins start scattering all over the place. And the girl who is sitting in the wagon sees the money, all the gold coins flying all over. She jumps off the wagon and she starts collecting the money. The father, runs out and he sees the daughter, and he's just picking up the coins. And he says, quick, get back into the wagon. We don't want him to think like he did a miracle, I'll take the coins with me. The story is illustratively. Yeah.
Is that a true story?
Baal Shem Tov story. Baal Shem Tov was full of miracles. So he says, this is us, I mean, we're so used to, we get into such a rut in life, thinking that this is what life is, that we don't see the big story behind it. Obviously, the Baal Shem Tov did a miracle. But, he thought, you get used to just accepting the nature of the world and so forth. The story of Purim, the story of this time, the story of the miracle of Purim, the story why we read it, is because it's supposed to help teach us how to look beyond to see the deeper reality of what's going on. That it all is really orchestrated by God. Everything is the hand of God. Everything was planned for it. And even the downers and even the destructions and even the Hamans and everything else that was happening in the story was all bricks being laid by God in order that the positive should come out. And that is the message of Esther. In fact, as I said at the beginning, the name Esther comes from the word Haster Aster. It's not just once. Esther means concealment, which is a strange name to give a girl. I mean, if you want to name your daughter something, you say, what, concealed, hidden, what could you? It's just like it doesn't sound like a positive name. But Esther is also, it means Aster, double concealment. What is double concealment? Sometimes we're clueless, but we know we're clueless. We know we don't have the answers and so forth. And sometimes we're so clueless that we think we've got all the answers, like like the current news people and so forth that you hear on the broadcasters. They have all the answers about all the things about the diseases and the COVID and Ukraine and what the politicians are doing and so forth. And the problem is that's the double concealment. The double concealment is you don't even know that you don't know what you're talking about. That's to say you don't know what you're talking about. As Rabbi YY once said in one of his talks, he said, the more older he got, the more he realized that the best answer sometimes is to tell people, I just don't know. Not saying you don't know is actually a very smart thing to say sometimes. And so not knowing is actually the good thing. Life is a mystery. That's what the point of this class is about. Life is a mystery. There's a lot of unclear things about it. And the more we hang on to things and we think that we have to understand everything and we fit it into our heads and we understand and so forth, that is actually sometimes our biggest hang up. I mean, the things that really matter in life, we don't see that those are the important things. People think, get the doctor or they'll give you well. Actually, sometimes the most positive things for a person who is sick, right, is the number of people that come and visit them. That's why it's a mitzvah, the Bikur Holy. What is that? They can't measure that. That's not measurable. That's not data. That's not scientifically analyzable. But it's true. It's true. And the same thing is that the people also find that, that the more positive thoughts that a person has during the course of the day, it actually is called neural programming and it makes you happier. And if you start thinking about how terrible things are going, you know what? It's the law of attraction. It'll bring bad things. And if you think positive, it brings good things to it, which is also all the whole series of this class is all about, hey, you can actually attract good things to yourself by actually framing it and saying, sometimes I don't know, but I expect something good to happen, come out of it. As my wife often says, that's what's going to happen. It's going to happen something good. I don't know how it's going to happen. And being open to that really does open you up to positive things. And therefore, this is the story. This is the story of Purim. This is the story of the Jews. And if they went through the Holocaust and they thought every day was getting worse, they probably weren't going to get through it. But if they said, you know what, it's going to end someday and I'm going to get through this, that's going to get you through it. That's what helps you. So it's very, very important. These are very, very important lessons. This is the lesson that we're supposed to take away from here is you know what? There's much more to the story than what we think is going on. I heard he told a cute little story. He said once he was walking with his brother, he went to some Chinese restaurant in the Upper East Side. And, Simon is the older brother, my YY is the younger brother, and they were talking and so forth. And yes, he was talking about some of his problems, because he was, Simon's about 12 years older than him. And, he's sort of like a little bit of a father figure. And they were, talking. And all of a sudden, he says, how did you get the answers? So we were walking and he came past the bar, and the bars was, there was a big sign out front called Jake's Dilemma. And he said, that's very funny because one of the nicknames that Rabbi Yosef Yitzchak Jacobson's, his name was Jakey. So he said, is that you? Because there's this picture of this guy there. He says, I don't know if that has anything to do with me. They walked a little further and they came past an Apple sign, and they had an Apple computer there, and the sign said, think differently. So he said, I think that's my message. And actually, Rabbi Simon Jacobson says that is actually the source of one of the things that he says all the time in his classes. And he says, if you think what you thought and you did what you did, then you're going to get what you got. He says it's a simple equation. You have to think differently. You have to reframe. You have to not look at the difficulties of life and the problems of life and saying, you know what? I know what's going to happen here. It's going to be terrible. No, think differently. Think differently. It actually opens you up to something different, to something new, it's something exciting. That's a very important lesson, and it's an important lesson of breaking through these veils. And that is really, truly a big piece of life, is to realize the mystery and the strangeness of life. He gave another cute example. Well, not cute. It was actually a very deep example. He says, sometimes you go to couples that have been married happily for 20, 30, 40 years, and you say, how did you do it? And they say, you know what? I don't know. It's a mystery. I don't know how we did it. I don't know. I really can't explain it to you. Says that's very true. That's very true. Because the biggest things in life about how we things work is really not in our control and doesn't fit into our head, and it's not linear and it's not understandable. And Purim is really to teach us, there's a lot of things going on here. And, you have to be like Esther and be optimistic and positive, and you can accomplish a tremendous amount, even though things necessarily, you can say Haman is in charge and the king is in charge in the situation, and we're a small minority, and it's basically the end. And it may very well look like that, so what? That doesn't mean that it's the whole story. It doesn't mean it's the whole story. So there you have, in a nutshell, one of the big themes about Purim is the mystery of our lives, the concealments of our lives, and also the inner strength that we have to actually get through this, because we are not alone. We have God, and He is planning, and all of these things are just bricks, and there might be a very twisty path. So I will finish off.
Shemin,
yeah,
we're witnessing something that we've just never really watched before firsthand and feel so helpless about.
Yeah.
How can we apply this to that?
The rabbi, a Russian Rabbi Don Rutkin, said, I don't understand what's going on there at all. I mean, he grew up in Moscow. His father was from Moscow. His mother was from Ukraine. He says, this is common. This is like, Americans marry Canadians, I mean, would America go to war over to Canada? It's one country. They're Slavs. They speak the same language. It's not understandable what's going on. So that's a good sign, though, that the fact that it's not understandable, that it is at the time of Purim, that perhaps there is a bigger story going on here and so forth. Can I actually say I have it? I have to admit that sometimes my mind doesn't go there. We want to see it all wrapped up and made clear and logical. But that doesn't mean that it's not necessarily that we can't, that things can't come out well. And that is also part of the lesson of Purim. Let me explain it in the terms of a story, because stories sometimes get you to a place where you can't normally get to. So this is a story in Israeli history in 1929. In the early 20s, in Israel, in the Yishuv, there was established a yeshiva in Hebron by one of the great leaders that the European Jewry, the Alta Slobodka. Yep, he established the yeshiva in Hebron, and it became very well known and famous. And people came from many different countries, not only from Israel but also from the United States and from Europe, and they would learn there. And it really developed a very positive reputation. There happened to be a young boy who was learning there. His name was Wexler, I believe was the name. His parents got concerned about him, because at that time in Israel, it was under the control of the British. And the British were pretty partial to the Arabs. So the Arabs were oftentimes doing pogroms and attacks on Jews, and the British would stand on the side and not do anything. And the idea of fairness and impartiality and so forth. Yeah, right. So his parents were from America, and they said, we should ask for him to come back home. Okay. So they did. They said, and the boy was ready to go back home. And the Rosh Yeshiva, the leader of that yeshiva there, said, he's a great student. Don't take him away. But he was losing the argument. The parents were concerned. And the Rosh Yeshiva asked the big rabbi in Jerusalem, he said, maybe you could intervene with the parents and say something to keep the boy here. So they reached out to this rabbi in Jerusalem. He was the chief rabbi in Jerusalem at the time. His name was Tzvi Pesach Frank. Don't remember all the names, okay? I do that. Anyway, Rabbi Frank wrote the parents and said, listen, Hebron is the safest place for Jews in the entire country. I tell you why. Because there's a rabbi who's in charge there. His name is Rabbi Slonim, and he's friends with the Arabs. He runs their bank. They all go to him for advice. And any place that they're going to be, he's going to be safe and he's going to be protected, is going to be in Hebron. Okay, the parents heard that, and so they allowed him to stay. Came 1929, Hebron was not the safest place in the world, because that was the famous Hebron massacres. The Arabs went on a rampage and they didn't care about anything, about anybody or anything, or about themselves. 146, I think, Jews perished. 96, something, 76, maybe 76, 42 from that yeshiva, and including this Rabbi Slonim. They'd all gone to his house, and there was Shabbos, and they were barricaded them in. They would be safe there, and the Arabs didn't care. They went into his house too.
Wait, Rabbi
It's terrible.
Steinmetz?
Yeah.
Oh, wow.
Yeah. And so did this boy. The rabbi in Jerusalem who gave the advice to keep him there was bothered by this terribly,
Oh, the boy died.
that the boy died, and he gave the advice and that he was killed. And he was never really forgave himself. The story is told by the grandson of that rabbi. He says in 1960, he told the story at a public gathering. He said, I'm going to tell you a story about my grandfather. And that is, I know my grandfather, and I know my grandfather until he passed away in 1960, and he was bothered by this story the rest of his life. He just never talked about it because the nature of Jews, especially Eastern European Jews, they didn't talk about their problems. They didn't spread it around. What bothered them, they kept to themselves. But it was, you could see, it was something that he constantly was concerned about. In 1960, the grandson says, now this is the grandson of the rabbi in Jerusalem who gave the advice, okay? Let's get it clear. He was in the army
grandson of the
in Jerusalem who gave the advice. He was in the Israeli army, and it was a rainy day, and he was in the trenches, and there was nothing to do. It was muddy and nothing, and they weren't doing anything. So he started talking to the guy next to him, and they started trading stories. And he told the story about his grandfather and what his grandfather, the advice that he gave, and how the boy was killed in the Hebron massacres. And the other soldier in there said, that's true, but that's only half the story. He says, really? There's another part of the story? He says, yeah, I am actually a historical researcher. That's my profession. And one of the things that I know about that story was as follows. And that is that boy's father in Chicago had a lot of connections in the United States State Departments and a lot of power and pull. And he was furious at what had happened to his son because the British just stood there and did nothing for hours. They were begged at the massacre. It was after hours they finally shot a few bullets in the air, and that stopped the massacre. So for all that time, they were asked to do something. They didn't do anything. So he started making a fuss. He made a fuss with the State Department and the president and everything else. He had a lot of political connections, and he just couldn't rest. And the U.S. put pressure on the British, and they got rid of that high commissioner. And they replaced him with another one. His name was Arthur Rockleby. Okay, Sir Arthur Rockleby. Sir is very important, I guess. Most of the commissioners over Israel were very strict about Jews coming into the country. This guy seemed to love the Jews. He let in the period of time from 1931 to 1938 that he was in charge of Israel, he opened up the gates for the Jews from Eastern Europe especially. 3 times the usual amount came in. Israel's Jewish population more than doubled in size. And it was really a tremendous change. And not only that, the guy continues, but probably the reason the Jews were able to win the War of Independence was because they had so many people in Israel. Before that, it was a very small community, but then it became a huge community, and it really gave the Jews the power and the strength and the economic wealth and so forth to be able to do the battle in 1948. So probably you don't know the other half of the story, and that is that this boy was actually the catalyst for us being here and having a country.
And also, all those people were saved from the
Mm.
And all those people were saved from the Holocaust.
Mm.
Yaakov Frank went back. He came back that night to his home. He lived in Jerusalem. He had a wife and a little child. And as soon as he came back, it was still raining. And he told his wife, I'm not staying here tonight. I'm going to see my grandfather. His wife says, why? You can see him every week. You'll see him on Shabbos. Wait a few days. He says, no. I know my grandfather. I have to see him right away tonight. I have to give him some relief. So he goes over, he knocks on his door, he goes to see him. And his grandfather is now elderly. I mean, this is 1960. This story happened in 1929. He was like in his 90s at this point, but he was still an active man. Anyway, he sees his grandson. He says he's thrilled to see him and to talk. And why did you come in the middle of the week? And he says, I have to tell you something. And they sat down, they had some tea together, and he told him the whole story that he had never heard before about how, true, the boy died. But on the other hand, the fact that there's a state of Israel and all the Jews were saved from the Holocaust is this part of the story. And the grandfather said, you don't know what a stone you took off my chest that I have been carrying for all these years. You didn't have to come tonight, and I would have understood that. You have a wife and a kid at home, but you did a tremendous chesed and kindness to me by coming and telling me about this.
So
Not quite the end of the
really what
story.
they're
It's
saying
not-
is because of that massacre, the state of Israel.
Yeah, because of the
became a
massacre
state.
and because of the boy that was killed, it connects the dots. And in the history, it actually was the catalyst for the removal of the high commissioner, which meant that all these Jews came into the country.
Well,
Came Shabbos, grandson decides to go visit his grandfather again. He comes, he stops by his sister's house, and his sister says, unfortunately, grandfather passed away this morning.
oh, that's
Story is
wow.
not even done there. A few years later, this man, Yaakov Frank, happened to be visiting America, went to New York, and went to see the Lubavitcher Rebbe. The Lubavitcher Rebbe said, your grandfather was a famous man. Can you tell me some stories? So he tells him a few stories. And the Rebbe is not happy with it yet. He still wants more. So he tells him the story. And the Rebbe listens to the whole story. And he says, yeah. And what do we learn from this story? The guy says, the Rebbe says, what you learn from the story is that if you have a good idea and you want to do, and it's a good thing to do, then you should do it right away. You shouldn't wait. So that's the story there. That has many different
Oh,
levels.
because his grandfather died the very next day.
He died a few days later on Shabbos.
Okay.
Yeah.
Oh,
Yeah.
okay.
So I mean,
That's
we don't see.
true.
That's a story. It's a true story. The guy tells it. It's recorded. It really happened. All the names are the real names of the real people that happened and so forth. And it's another modern day Purim story, of how the dots all connect together in our lives and how things actually, they don't happen right away. They don't clear up right away. But that's not our mission. Is necessarily to follow the whole master plan of our lives and so forth. Our story is like Esther. She didn't know what was going to happen there. And yet she was put in a situation, and Mordechai told her and says, maybe the whole reason that you're here was just for this moment, that you should be able to go into the king and be able to plead the case of the Jews. And guess what? It was. I mean, the fact that there are Jewish people walking around today is only because of Esther. Haman was going to kill every man, woman, and child. There was no front lines. It was everybody, everywhere. There would be no Jewish people. So again, you don't know. It looks terrible, but it's also you're set on a mission. We have a mission, and sometimes that mission is a very strange mission and doesn't seem like the right mission for us. I didn't want this. I didn't choose this. As Shakespeare says, right? Some people are born great. Some people grow into greatness, and some people have greatness thrown on you. Sometimes the difficulties that you're going through and the problems you're going through are actually part of you didn't choose it, but God chose us to go through this time and to be here right now and to go through this mission and to be able to do what we do. And that's not necessarily a bad thing. That can actually be a very positive thing, even though it doesn't necessarily outwardly look like such a great story. That's one of the big lessons of the Purim story. And with that, I will switch the camera over. My beautiful, who was part of the good
Thank
stuff.
you so much. Yasher Koach.
Chag
Yes,
Sameach.
Lord.
Yeheshko Shemesh.
Yeah.
Chag Sameach.
Thank you for saying that.
Yes,
Okay,
oh
good.
yes. Purim.
Okay, I'll do that.
You'll do that.
Okay. Emir
Okay.
Hashem.
Yes, Chag Sameach.
Okay.
Thank you.
Thank you.
Thank you.
Okay. Good to see everybody. Hello, hi, Amy, hi, Molly, hi, Golden. Golden, your former name was Beth. Was it Beth? Isn't it Beth? Golden Liba.
Goldaliba.
I know, but don't you have, how do I know you as Beth?
No, Karen.
Karen, thank you. Thank you. I
Yes.
remember your
How
first
are
name.
you? You look lovely, Kadina Hara.
Thank you so much. And
What are you
Dina,
looking
so
for?
nice to see you. Dina, what a beautiful logo. So, but you're prettier than the logo.
You're also beautiful. Thank you.
Yeah.
So anyway, does anybody have anything they want to say before we begin?
I like your glasses. I
Yeah,
really did. Those are fun.
unfortunately, they don't make them anymore. I would get many more pairs, but they don't make them anymore.
Oh,
So,
you look great.
yeah. Okay, so
I mentioned it to Yeheshka Shemin, but I have a friend who I think might like to come and join. She's a friend of mine from New York, and she, her kids have gone through yeshiva, and her daughter's now at Stern. And I was telling her about the class, and I don't think she was able to make it tonight, although I sent her the link like right at 6:59. But
Mhm.
yeah, I'm going to try to encourage her to come.
Awesome. Amy, you have such a broad group of friends. It's so nice,
I do. I'm very blessed. I
Yeah,
have
thank
people
God.
all over the place. Yeah,
Yeah.
I'm very blessed.
Okay, so the title
They are too.
yeah, that's absolutely true. So the title of the class is the title of this class is how to unmask evil, and how do we learn it from Purim? And I'll try and keep it brief. I can keep it to 2 words. How do we unmask? First, let me start with the 4 things that we do. Number 1, we're in extraordinary time. How do we know that? Because Lubavitch Rebbe, who is never wrong about any public prophecy, told us that we are in the time when the Geula when the redemption of the entire world and the Jewish people is happening. And number 2, we have everything. Our souls were handpicked to be in this time. Number 3, we have all the tools we need to negotiate this time. We have the Torah, and we have great leaders to give us advice like the Rebbe. And 4, what we're doing tonight actively advances the process of redemption. I'm just going to close the door. Okay, good. So how do we unmask evil? There's only one way to unmask evil that I know of, that you can see from the Purim story. And that is, as soon as the possibility for evil comes into the world, when things are not clear, as soon as a person achieves clarity, which means total reliance on Hashem, the recognition that Hashem does, did, and will do everything that ever happened in the world, is the foundation for wiping out evil, and in our own lives, in the world in general. So very briefly, in Purim, how did the situation come to happen? It's not just a random collection of things that this madman came to power. It's our sages say that what facilitated Haman's coming to power. Haman came to power because the Jewish people separated from Hashem. They lost they started becoming more and more dependent on, more and more in line with political reality. The political reality is what runs the world. And they bowed to the powers that be. They literally bowed to an idol. They went to a feast that they shouldn't have gone to, not just because there was some non-kosher food, but mainly because it was a feast to celebrate that the God of the Jews doesn't exist anymore, or that he doesn't care about his people anymore. Because Ahasuerus knew there was a prophecy that the Jews were supposed to leave his country, were supposed to be able to go back to Israel 70 years after their exile from Israel. There were 2 prophets who gave that prophecy. Jewish people, don't despair. You will go back to Israel in 70 years. And according to Ahasuerus' calculations, those 70 years passed. That's why he made a huge party. Yay! Those Jews are finished. Their God is finished. And the Jews were so afraid of Ahasuerus that they were afraid to insult him by not going to that party, even though Mordechai told them that is totally not a party for us. And so they did various things that showed that, they were relying on the political authorities, not relying on Hashem. And so that enabled evil to flower. That enabled the situation to arise. And Haman literally rose to power. And what cured the whole situation? What cured the situation is that the Jewish people woke up and they returned to total reliance on Hashem. You know, when Haman issued his decree, right? It was supposed to be a secret between he and Achashverosh. They made this plan to get rid of the entire Jewish people in all 127 countries under Achashverosh's rule in one day, the 13th of Adar. And it was supposed to be a secret, but Mordechai found out about it. And Mordechai went to the people and he said, we have to do teshuvah. This is happening because we've abandoned our God. And they said, Mordechai, it's not true. This is happening because of you. You got us in trouble. You didn't bow to Haman, and Haman got so mad at you that he got mad at the whole Jewish people, wants to wipe us out. It's your fault. It's not our fault. And Mordechai said, no, Jewish people. And he explained it to them that this is, that you guys, he knew it through prophecy that Hashem, you dropped the rock, you dropped your relationship with Hashem, and that doesn't work out well for the Jews. And to their amazing credit, to the amazing credit of the Jewish people, they heard, and every single one of them did teshuvah, every single one of them. And they stopped bowing to political authority and they aligned themselves completely with Hashem. They stuck to Hashem. How did they do that? Haman would not have killed anybody who decided to drop being Jewish. If they would drop their allegiance to Judaism, Haman would not. It was only a decree against the Jews, not. And if you dropped your allegiance, you would have gotten out of the decree that to be annihilated, and that the decree was in effect for 11 months. Haman and Achashverosh made their plan around Nisan. That's like shortly before Pesach and shortly before Passover. And they made the plan that it should happen the 13th of Adar. Adar is just before Nisan. So it was almost a whole year to go because they'd already passed that year's Adar. They were already in Nisan. They had to wait 11 more months to get to the 13th of Adar. 11 months. So for 11 months, the Jewish people stood strong. Not one of them converted. They said, we are just sticking to Hashem. We got into this pickle because we forgot about Hashem. We forgot about relying on Him. We began to rely on political authority. We are, whatever happens, we're not doing that. We are sticking to Hashem. And not one of them converted, not one single one converted. And they anybody could have escaped Haman's decree if they had just converted. So this was such an amazing achievement, such a huge achievement, such a wake up that the Jews realigned themselves completely with Hashem. And it wasn't out of fear. If it was done out of fear, they would have converted because that was the easiest way to get out of the decree. They just knew this is not for us. We're going to return to who we are, a people that totally relies on Hashem. And this achievement was so enormous that it made Purim, when Mashiach comes, it's said that, that all the holidays are going to recede in brightness. We're going to still have them. We will still observe them. Pesach, Passover, Shavuos, Sukkot, all those things, Rosh Hashanah, Yom Kippur. I have to take some water.
Amen.
We're going to have all of them, but the light of Mashiach, of the days of Mashiach, is going to be so bright that they're going to recede in brightness. You're not going to notice them as much as you notice them now. However, the light of Purim will never fade, and it'll be even brighter than the days of Mashiach. Why? Because of the amazing accomplishment of the Jewish people, that they had total reliance on Hashem. They achieved it. The same thing is true of Esther. She did the same exact thing. When Mordechai told her that Mordechai told her, you have to go to Achashverosh and plead for your people. And she said, okay, but can I wait? because if I go in and he didn't call me, it's, you know, he can get, the law is you can't go in unsummoned, and the penalty is death unless he sticks out that golden sharvit, that golden scepter. And Mordechai said, no, the Jewish people have done teshuvah now. They're doing teshuvah now. And who knows, if you wait, they might lose it again. Now's the time. Now we're strong. Now's the time. Our case in heaven is good. Now's the time to go to Achashverosh. And so Esther said, okay, the imavadati it's imavadati ukusha avadati. I don't remember the prefix beforehand. What does it mean? And if I die, I die. And she, she could have said, if I, okay, I may die. But she said two, and if I die, I die. And why did she say it twice? Because in going into Achashverosh, she was not only risking her physical life, she was risking everything, absolutely everything. Because not only could she lose her life, but by going into Achashverosh, I don't want to tell you the whole gory story, but by going into Achashverosh, that most of the sages say that Esther, there's a whole a tractate in the Gemara that's written about the Megillah. That's how we know so much about that time, and it's widely written that Esther was not only Mordechai's cousin, she was his wife. And so she was a married Jewish woman. Achashverosh didn't know that, but he wouldn't have cared even if he knew. He took married women, unmarried women. He just didn't care. And
Who was she married to? Who was she married to?
She was married to Mordechai.
Oh, she was. So he was her. He wasn't her uncle. He
was her cousin, not an uncle, and he was her cousin, and he married her. And so there's a certain Jewish law, and now she's married to this ogre, or he, whatever, he took her, he put the crown on her head. And by going into, she said, Mordechai, all this time, I've been able to secretly maintain a relationship with you because I'm not considered an adulteress, because I'm considered a forced woman. A forced woman can go back to her husband at any time, after whatever happens to her, because it's not her fault. But an adulteress can never go back to her husband. It's a Jewish law. And she said, if I go into him, what is that? That's a statement of, you know what he's going to think. It's a statement of my offering myself to him. And if he kills me, he kills me. But if he doesn't kill me, I've lost everything that I have spiritually. I've lost everything. I'm going to be an adulteress. I'm going to be considered an adulteress. And Mordechai said, I don't know all the calculations. I just see from prophecy that this is what you have to do. And we have to rely on Hashem. And she said, okay, the im avadati, and there's some, the preface is not im, but whatever. If I die, I die. If I die in this world, I'll die in this world. If I die in the next world, if I've destroyed my next world, I've destroyed my next world. And by the way, after that point, she's already, if she destroys her next life, she also can't return to Mordechai. So she's destroyed everything that is of value to her. Everything she's ready to throw out of the window for the Jewish people. She's giving up everything. That's why she's called Esther Hamalka. In Jewish stuff, your title is not an incidental thing. She is known throughout history as Esther Hamalka because what is a king, a melech or a malka? She's a queen. A king or a queen in Jewish thought is not some big shot. A king or a queen in Jewish thought is somebody who gives up everything for the people. They only exist for the people. And she was willing to give up absolutely everything. And anyway, she goes into Achashverosh, and she fasted 3 days and 3 nights. She's weak. And so she's not relying on her beauty in order to change Achashverosh's mind. And when she goes through all those rooms to get to Achashverosh, the last room before she gets to him is full of idols. And when she's in that room, she has no physical strength. And as soon as she walks into the room with idols, she's lost her prophecy. She doesn't have a sense of prophecy anymore. And she doesn't even have a sense of her. She said she was an orphan who was like this with Hashem. And she even lost that. She lost everything. She was just like almost reduced to nothing. And from that point, she davened to Hashem. From the point when she had absolutely, she couldn't rely on her beauty. She didn't rely on her special relationship with Hashem. She didn't rely on anything. She said, I'm Ribono Shalom, this is you. If you want it, this is what it's going to be. Please save your people. And from that point, Hashem answered her. And so anyway, total reliance. We see from the Jewish people and from Esther, total reliance on Hashem works miracles. And I'll end with a tiny little story that I just heard. And it's a tiny little story I heard from that Hasidic lady. I listened to Mindy Feldman, and I listened to her class. Every once in a while, I enjoy it. So she was telling a story about something that happened in Muncie. She lives in Muncie. I used to live in Muncie for 6.5 years, and it was before a Yom Tov, and there was a man, and he had a big family, and things were going terrible in his work. He didn't have work for a long time, and he had no money. They had no money, and it's before Yontif. And on Yontif, you're supposed to eat and drink and have all these special foods and lavish stuff. And he had not a penny to go shopping, and he had a big family, right? And it's probably in some of the holidays last for a whole week. And his wife said, "My dear, go to the grocery store. We have not a stick of food in the house. It's going to be Yontif soon. It's going to be Yom Tov. Go to the store. I'm going to sit here with my Tehillim. Tehillim are Psalms. I'm going to sit here with my Tehillim, and I'm going to daven to Hashem. And I don't know how it's going to happen, but you're going to have the money. They're going to give you credit. Something's going to happen. Just go to the store and don't worry about it. I'm sitting here with my Tehillim, and Hashem is going to help us. I just know Hashem is going to help us." The guy goes to the store. He fills up his cart. He has a big family, right? He needs meat. On Yom Tov, you eat meat, you eat fish, you eat all sorts of nice things. He fills up his cart with what his family needs for Yom Tov, and he's wheeling it to the this is a true story. He's wheeling it to the checkout counter, and he has no idea, because he's exhausted his credit at almost every store. He has no idea how this is going to happen. He doesn't have a dime. He doesn't have a dollar in his wallet. And he goes up to the register, but then he remembers, we need this. And he's first in line. And he said, "Oh, just a second. They're ringing him up. He's just a second. I have to go get something else." He ran and got something else. And he remembered, I got to get something else. He ran into the store and got something else. There's a huge line behind him. He goes 3 times to run to get something. And the guy behind him in line cracks. He flips out, and he said, "It's Erev Yontif. It's the day. Yontif is tonight. How dare you? How dare you do this to us? Every second counts. Because certain holidays, certain times, you can't cook on Yontif. You have to do everything beforehand. You have to. It's certain times. Some whatever. So and Yontif has a time limit. People have to get home. They can't drive on Yontif. And so the guy who's flipping out said, "You have such chutzpah. What do you think you're doing? It's Erev Yontif. And are you so self-centered? What is wrong with you?" The guy feels horrible. And everybody in line feels horrible. This guy, in Judaism, almost the worst thing you can do, the worst sin you can do, is to embarrass somebody in public. And this other guy embarrassed this person in public. It's so bad that another person in line goes up to the person who was embarrassed, puts his arm on him and says, "Oh, he didn't mean it. We're just all in a rush. He didn't really mean it." Then the guy who gave him the grief, he feels bad all of a sudden. He realizes, I embarrassed this guy in public. He goes up to him, he says, "Just check out. I'm going to pay your bill. I feel bad about it. I'm going to pay your bill. Okay, I'm going to pay it. It's $700. He pays the bill. Afterwards, the second guy, the one who paid the bill, rings up his thing, and he goes out in the parking lot, and he sees the first guy's bawling. He's at his carriage, and he's bawling and bawling and bawling. And so the rich guy goes up to him and he said, I already said I'm sorry. Just forgive me already. I already said I'm sorry. Go home to your family. And the guy said, you don't understand. I'm not crying about you. He said, I'm crying about how I saw Hashem in my life. My wife is home. And she said, don't worry, just go to the store. Hashem is going to help us. She totally relied on Hashem. And look what happened. And the rich guy didn't believe it. He said, I don't believe your story. I'm sorry, I don't believe that. And he said, I'm going to call my wife. He takes out his cell phone. He calls his wife. And he doesn't say anything. And he said, honey, it's me. And she said, don't worry, honey. I'm here with my Tillim. I'm davening. It's going to work out. I just know it. And the guy was so flabbergasted that he wrote out 12 head checks for the next 12 months to pay this guy's groceries. Is that incredible? It was such an incredible story. So the point is total reliance, it works miracles. And anyway, that's the end of my story. I'm going to end the recording and I'm going to end the recording.